I'd like to welcome David Balakrishnan here from the Turtle Island Quartet to talk about an upcoming world premiere that we have with the Turtle Island called Island Prayers. And it's really great to have you here, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be part of this.
So we've worked together for a long time. I am thrilled
Yeah.
that Mimi is able to host and to be the lead commissioner for this incredible project that you're working on. But before we talk about that, I'd like to frame the Turtle Island's work for audiences who aren't familiar with your work. Turtle Island has really honored the lineage of musical traditions performed in North America, both past and present. And most recently, you forged this new direction with Island Prayers, which is a multi-composer piece, very ambitious. And your work in general, and also this evening length work, celebrates the range of influences within the rich cultural spectrum of the continent known as Turtle Island. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about perhaps why you formed Turtle Island Quartet and how Turtle Island is so unique in the arts ecosystem.
Oh, I love this question. It's central to my identity on this planet as it feels. So goes back for me to the early 1980s, when I was still a young fellow, just forming and trying to find my place in the world. And so I started experimenting with composing music from these different styles that I was attracted to playing. I'm a kind of a restless soul, and I always would get restless in any one style I was in, and would go to another, and kind of a way my life evolved. So but I didn't have any sense of where it all fit in me, and so I was working with a great teacher named Alaudine Matthew, who helped me kind of get into where that could happen, which was in a string quartet model. And then I had this idea that each member of the quartet would be like me. And this is in the early 80s, so there weren't a lot of jazz, fiddle, classical Indian fiddle players running around, right? And then specifically, especially, that I was so influenced by Beethoven, because I would listen to studying his music deeply, and seeing the genius that's there. And I wanted to channel that kind of level of craft with the guts of the music all being American style, right? So it wouldn't sound European, that it would really be this, but still have that incredible vision of the European classical tradition of composition. And so luckily for me, it hit a chord with friends of mine in the Bay Area, and also and so the right people showed up. So we could actually have it in the string quartet. And so in 1985, I was actually able to have a string quartet where where it could be alive. And because these musicians that can play this kind of style are improvisers, they're not just playing written out music. So that's how the group came about and really flowered and introduced itself. And so all these years later, of course, we've played much original music, and but mostly still known as a jazz group that covers jazz standards. And so the pandemic hit, and everything shut down. And at the same time, I had just had a chance to record with Terence Blanchard, who is for me, he's like I mean, I don't know how to describe that relationship, but I just admire him, and he's become such a good friend, and that was just magic for me to have that chance to go to record with his group. And we played one of my pieces, and he loved it so much he put it on the record, and it just kind of inspired. It just felt right that this could be a time to change the whole. It's not changing, just change the camera a bit and go more towards what I always really envisioned, which you could be more of an original music group founded in the music that I write from all those years ago that I keep writing, and then embrace composers like Rhiannon, Giddens, like Terence, of course, and Jerod, from different parts of the triumph of the styles that they represent. Of course, those composers are also covering all sorts of ground. but in a certain way, this was a way that could kind of embrace and redefine the quartet, and also on top of it, have a spiritual, cultural relevance as part of the title, which is a larger aspect of what's happening as well. And so it's a big reach, Michelle. I'm
Mm.
just so excited about this. It's like my whole life's on the line. It feels
It,
like so.
it's so exciting, and it is very ambitious, and that's one of the reasons we're so excited about it too.
Yeah.
We want to support this effort, and it's going to be amazing. I
Yeah.
know. I wanted to share that at the UW this semester they're teaching string improvisation for
Ah,
classical music artists. This is the field catching up with the work that you really
yeah.
started so many years ago. And
Yeah.
for those of you who aren't as familiar with the composers who you've engaged for this, I want to say a few things. So Terence Blanchard, of course, is really a genre-defining trumpeter and a composer with a very large range of works. He's worked with Spike Lee on film scores and George Lucas and a number of others. He also had his opera performed, the first opera after the pandemic, at the Metropolitan Opera. I was there. Fire Shut Up in My Bones. He composed, the first African American composer of a Metropolitan Opera ever. And he's had his operas performed all over, Chicago Lyric, etc. And his jazz projects with
Yeah.
legends like Herbie Hancock, Art Blakely, Wayne Shorter, of course, Turtle Island Quartet.
Being around
Uh,
him and watching him work, he has such a he's it's hard to explain, and it's amazing. He's just so natural about what he does. He's very direct and natural, obviously virtuosic beyond belief,
yeah.
but there's an ease that he has, and yet he covers so much ground, and it's just being around that is so inspiring for me. So that we have a very special relationship, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've engaged Rhiannon Giddens, who we also have coming on the season later this year. And we also have a special announcement coming up this spring about some work that we're doing with Rhiannon. But she, of course, is a MacArthur Genius Fellow recently. She's a singer, she's a banjo player, and really thinks about the foundational traditions of bringing together bluegrass and American roots. She's also an opera singer, was trained as an opera singer, has a strong foundation in classical music also. And she's the current artistic director of Silk Road Ensemble. And one of the exciting things recently was her opera Omar was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for composition. And I'm curious how your relationship with Rhiannon evolved and how
Yeah.
this connection happened.
Yeah, and so I've known it's weird because when our original cellist was Mark Summer, when Mark Summer left
Yeah.
the band,
Yeah.
the person that joined us was Malcolm Parson, who was previously that with the Chocolate Drops,
Right.
Rhiannon's
He's
group, and that
performed
was
at
right
me,
when
actually.
Rhiannon was transitioning to being more of a solo artist, and so
Right.
Malcolm,
Right.
it was just kind of worked well for all of us, and so that was kind of my Rhiannon was already starting to blow up in the world, and I knew of the Chocolate Drops, but it made me more aware because, and then just keeping track of what she was doing. She's but from afar, because like these people like Terence and Rhiannon, they're like huge stars, and so I'm blessed to be around Terence. I haven't had that opportunity to work with Rhiannon as a player, to be with her, and I've only really met her once, and this was in about a year and a half ago. I went to see her play at the SF Jazz, and that was my experience to hear her live for the first time.
And then, of course, you're working with Jerod Impichchaachaaha Tate, who is composer in residence for New Music USA, and is also a Joyce Award winner, has written for the San Francisco Symphony, for Ethel, the
Yeah,
Quartet Ethel, the National Symphony, a number of others. He's also a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and whose stomp dances employ the shaking of turtle shells, among many
yeah.
traditions involving the turtle and Turtle Island. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about the genesis of your relationship with Jerod and your thinking around this collaboration.
Yeah, because right when the pandemic hit, I came across Jared's music, with listening to Ethel mostly, just because of string quartet. I can't but also there's he wrote an orchestral piece that for the San Francisco symphony. That's an amazing piece, and so as part of like at that period in the pandemic time when everything felt like it was not gonna, you really wonder whether anything was gonna happen, and that as part of fantasizing about how to rebuild, so to speak, I just love the idea of he would be able to write us something that would be, because he's coming from so strongly the classical tradition and the Native American tradition. He delivers both sides of something that really needs to be part of this story. And his craft was so high, and his groove, he's got all this feel in his music. And I knew it would be it may be the most challenging for us of the material we're playing, because it's purely classical, where we do so much improvising and groove-based stuff. His music is more designed for the classical string quartet. Yet he brings in all these other influences. So it's going to widen the program in a way that's going to be surprising, and brings in his natural understanding.
Now I'm curious, is improvisation involved in Jerod's piece?
Not a bit. We don't get to hide behind. Part of that is like we gotta play Now I'll write full out written out music myself a lot, but there's a way we're still playing it with a jazz flavor. So this we really had to go, okay, we gotta put that part aside and deliver on it, and it's really a wonderful challenge for us, because Jerod's still bringing in, because what you call classical music nowadays is so changed from it was in 1985. So he's bringing all these other influences. You can hear he's coming from a classical composer of 2023. It's a different time, and he's drawing from other elements that are already seeped into the classical tradition as well. So classical music now is different than it was when we started, and it's a reflection of that. So
yeah, so fascinating. And of course your piece, and
yes,
and I'm really excited to hear that. And I wonder if you can take a moment now and we can just talk a little bit more about your development as a composer, and graduating from UCLA in the San Francisco Bay Area, going on to work with David Grisman and Stefan Grappelli, and then of course you talked about the stylistic integration of so many different influences in your music. But if you could just talk a little bit about how you came to be the composer that you are.
Yeah, that's a good question, because the way I envisioned Turtle Island String Quartet from the very beginning is that the role of the composer is not the same as it is in a classical string quartet, where a composer writing for a classical string quartet knows that what they present is going to be played note for note, pretty much, with some, and that it will be expressed from the European view. So my feeling as a composer, I feel it hits more towards what you would look at with somebody like Duke Ellington in the tradition of jazz, where he would write for players, and then he would set them up to be their selves. So that early on, when I was just writing all the music just for myself to play, because I didn't have a band, so to speak, I wrote a lot of parts that once the group got together, I realized in some very tense moments that these players weren't going to put up with me dictating too much. It's a different dynamic. Instead of a classical string quartet where you got to come through and play, Jerod's writing a piece, we got to play it. But in this dynamic, it's their group too, and they want the music to reflect them. So it really challenged me. So one of the things I think I've gotten more adept at is writing for string quartet, where the players have more a chance to be themselves.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, David, and I can't wait to see you in person.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle.